Welcome back to our podcast. Today will be a little bit lighter on news articles, but we'll start with the 2021 BMW 2 Series GrandCoupe, chiefly among which they've added a front-wheel drive option as the new base model. Now, this front-wheel drive option is about $2,000 less than the base model, which was originally all-wheel drive, and now they've added one below that that is front-wheel drive. And I think I'll dive a little bit more into this topic later on when we're looking at used cars. But my big concern with this is going to be brand dilution. It was always supposed to be about driving experience, driving pleasure. I mean, they call themselves the ultimate driving machine. And to be honest, the past couple years has really proved that they haven't really been focusing on that. If you watch some of our videos, you'll note that although they're making faster and faster, more technically impressive cars, driving feel of their cars has really changed, and it's starting to lose focus a little bit, and it's very clear that BMW is really focused on trying to sell their cars in big numbers. When you think of a BMW, you don't think of luxury necessarily in terms of absolute comfort or the best interiors, things like that, but BMW was always focused on how it made the driver feel. And nowadays, if they're missing that point, what are they offering in the market? Are they as luxurious as a Mercedes or an Audi? I'm not quite sure, but they're not driving very well either. In fact, some of the German competition is actually overtaking BMW in terms of actual driving sensation and feel and fun. And this car will sell, given its price point, and it looks like it's going to start at $37,000, something like that. So this car will sell. It's an easy way for someone to get into BMW, and that's really it. It's basically a badge that they're selling at this point. But I'll talk a little bit more about the lineage of BMW and where they came from and why older enthusiast BMW cars are starting to appreciate in value. But that's it for news for this week. Now, for used cars on sale this week, we're taking a look at some things from Cars and Bids. Here's a 2013 Subaru Impreza WRX STI hatchback. Now remember, this is the last generation that the STI came in a hatchback. This was built from 2008 to 2014, this generation. It was also available as a sedan starting 2011, but the STI actually was hatchback only for the first couple of years for this body style, which is really neat. Now, again, Subaru doesn't make the STI in a hatchback or wagon form anymore, even overseas, and so these hatchbacks have really climbed in value over the past couple of years. This one is extra special because it's done less than 2,000 miles and is California kept. It's one owner, 1,970 miles. So extremely low mileage. It's basically like a brand new vehicle. In my opinion, this generation looks better as a hatchback anyway, so it's really the way to go. On the contrary though, I have driven this generation pretty extensively. I don't find that it drives as well as the older cars such as like the Hawkeye or the Blobeye or whatever. This generation is just a little bit softer. This was after Subaru stopped competing in rallying, so this STI was no longer a homologation model, and you can really feel that in its DNA. It was a little bit more watered down, so to speak, but the body style is fantastic. Everyone loved this hatchback design, and people were really disappointed in 2015 when they came out with the new WRX and STI that Subaru was no longer doing a hatchback or wagon body style. So that's pretty neat. Interesting to see how this will go up in bids. I'm kind of surprised with 5 days left. The bid is only at about $27,000 or so. I want to see what it's going to close at. There's one on Bring It Trailer which has higher mileage and is already at $34,000 with a couple days left. So this should go pretty well. There is a reserve on the car. I think the owner was worried that it would be sold at too low of a price. With that said, when I was looking at these cars a couple of years ago, they were going up in value, but I think they've started plateauing. So interesting to see, how the market has changed on these specific cars. Next up, for a car that has already been sold on Cars and Bids, is a 2002 BMW X5 3.0. Now this was the standard 6-cylinder engine, nothing crazy there, but it does have the rare 5-speed manual, which is really awesome. It's also in silver, and I have a huge attachment with this car, namely because back in the early 2000s, BMW came out with a short film series called BMW Films. They were basically commercials for these cars. They were filmed by very top, Hollywood directors and A-list actors. The X5 was used in one of the films. In all these films, there would be Clive Owen, who was the main character, unnamed. He'd be a driver of sorts that would basically transport people, get people to certain locations. In this specific instance, his job, he was hired by the UN to basically get this war photographer out of that dangerous area because he had been injured. And so you see this X5 escaping from people trying to hunt them down, and it was a manual X5, and it was very surprising even back then to have a luxury all-wheel drive SUV come with a manual. It's just very strange and just a really unique combination. This one only has 72,000 miles on it. Sold for about 10, 11 grand, so it's good that they haven't gone too high up in value. Would really like to have one of these in my garage one day. The final thing that we're showing here from carsandbids.com is a 2007 BMW M5, and this most importantly has the 6-speed manual. And that's important because a majority of these cars came with the SMG, which was not a dual clutch like BMW does now. It was actually a automated manual, so it was a single clutch manual gearbox, but it had an automated clutch. This was one of the really early versions of those paddle shifters, and it was not a great transmission. It looks like manual transmissions, only about 1,366 of the M5s were sold with a manual. Not only that, apparently manual transmissions were only available for the North American market, so even the Europeans didn't have that option. The SMG actually had a lot of issues. The pump in it would fail, and that's actually one of the Achilles heels on these cars, amongst a lot of other things. The V10 in these cars were also a little fragile as well. So really cool to see a manual one sold here. The M5s with the V10s don't go for huge money just yet, principally because of those reliability issues that we talked about. This generation BMW is starting to go up in value a little bit, and it goes back to the article I was talking about earlier with the 2 Series being offered with front-wheel drive. This was when BMW really cared about how their cars handled, how they felt. Their M cars specifically were always criticized, I guess, compared to AMG and Audi's S and RS as always having less horsepower than the rest of the competition, which was fair enough, but they were just better handling cars, and they would always make up for that on the track by handling much better than the competition. They weren't so focused on horsepower and numbers, but they really focused on chassis tuning, balancing out the vehicle. There was an article a couple weeks ago about, I think, Car and Driver Mode Trend testing the new BMW 4 Series, and they found that that car doesn't truly have a 50-50 weight distribution. It has 54% of the weight up in the front, which would have been completely unacceptable to BMW about 10 years ago, to have a car that front heavy. This is a company that prides itself in selling 50-50 weight distribution on every single vehicle, including their SUVs, which is really impressive. This kind of mid-2000s, late 2000s era of BMWs, really keep an eye on them. This era is the era that enthusiasts really love, and these vehicles are just going to go up in price. Which is a shame to see because I would love to own one from this era, but they're just getting more and more expensive. So that's the 2007 BMW M5, a 4-door sedan with a V10 engine and a 6-speed manual transmission. Next up on Bring a Trailer, actually, we have a 2004 Dodge Ram SRT-10 6-speed. Now, if you're not familiar with what this is, it's a Dodge Ram, 2-door, rear-wheel drive, no all-wheel drive option, but it's a Dodge Ram that has a Viper V10 in it. I'm not sure what the logic was, but it's extremely cool. Gas was a lot cheaper back then, so companies could build cars like this. So imagine a Dodge Ram pickup truck. Wasn't really good for off-roading, wasn't particularly good at hauling stuff in its bed, but it had a V10 engine from the Viper and a 6-speed manual transmission in it. Phenomenal. Not too much to say. I think some of these came with automatics, but actually a majority of them came with manuals. Just a wild car. Why would you do something like that? I think the Toyota Tundra came kind of close. I think TRD sold some type of supercharger kit. Don't know if that ever took off. But man, a V10 Dodge Ram pickup truck that's not a diesel with a manual transmission in it. Fantastic. 500 plus horsepower, very unique. Where I went to school, someone had one of these and I could hear them parking every single day in the parking lot. It was extremely loud. I think they even put an aftermarket exhaust in it. Really cool vehicle and definitely very early 2000s. We're going a little crazy with the used cars this podcast because there's, again, not that many interesting news articles to share, but I want to share this final used car with you. It's at CarMax and it's a 2020 Lexus GSF in yellow. Now, if that sounds familiar to you, then you are probably an avid watcher who has seen our Lexus GSF video. And not only is that the same model car, it's the literal same car. This exact car, and I've checked the VIN, is the same car that we tested earlier this year. Again, to remind you, it's a yellow GSF that's basically fully loaded. It's got less than 3,000 miles in it. And I've been watching this specific car trying to be sold forever. I think initially it was listed at 83,000. If you don't know, some of our vehicles come from manufacturers themselves, and basically they have a fleet of vehicles that are set aside for journalists, for media teams such as ourselves to film and review and whatnot. And at the end of the model year, or close to the end of the model year, those companies will then sell them off at auction and they get purchased, right? So they need to get rid of their inventory. We were actually the first media site to review this specific GSF in this area. When I got the vehicle, it had less than 100 miles on it. It was not broken in at all. And so if someone wants to own a piece of clutch kick history, here you are. Here's a fully loaded GSF, essentially, in a very bright yellow color. It's actually a pearl color, and it's actually currently in CarMax LA. It was originally sold in a CarMax up in the Seattle area because, of course, it was a local press vehicle. Lexus would have sold it at auction, at a nearby auction, to a nearby dealership up in this area, but it's now down in CarMax LA. I did check the vehicle history report. It is the same one. It's even listed that it was used as a manufacturer vehicle. This is the specific car that we reviewed. And again, it was originally listed at around $83,000. The car was about $90,000 brand new, and it's still not being sold. It's at $77,000 now. If you're able to wait, it'll probably drop even lower in price. But really interesting that, one, this car is still here, and two, that it's a car that we specifically reviewed, which is really interesting. So that's it for this week. No crazy news announcements. If you're watching this, it's probably already New Year's. If we haven't wished you already, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year's. Hope everyone is staying safe. If you're interested in more videos like this, go ahead and click the subscribe button. I promise that as soon as the pandemic is over, we will resume our normal filming, and that you don't have to be bored with long videos like this. We'll film something more exciting, and we'll give you something more interesting to watch. Until then, see you soon.